We're on Hecate for the first game of the best of 5 in the top right for Matrino Esports. It is Nightmare. And in the bottom left for Cloud9, it is GuMiHo. Best of 5 qualifying match. 1 of 4. Yes, 1 of 4 in the round of 8. Numbers. 4 people will qualify through today's open qualifier to face the regional representatives of the Americas in tomorrow's closed qualifier. The closed qualifier having 4 more players: Trigger, Special, Cham, and Scarlet. Kelazur actually would have been the representative for the closed qualifier if he didn't go ahead and just win the European qualifier yesterday. So, good news for him. And that means that Special gets seeded. Otherwise, he would be playing in the open one here today. So, no one guaranteed from the Americas region to move through to Katowice. But there's some hopefuls. They will be facing mainly Koreans and Europeans, though. In fact, 100%, there are no more North American representatives in this open qualifier. GuMiHo versus Nightmare, Creator versus Lambo, Harsum waiting for the winner of Young Bunny, and then DRG versus Classic are all the qualifying matches. So, Americas, am I right, guys? GuMiHo going for the sneak racks. It does look like Nightmare was able to scout it. He actually did bother looking around and didn't change up his build order. Sub an X core before a Nexus, totally common, even when you're expecting a more macro game, I guess. Yeah, no Proxy Reaper to worry about. Bit of a delay on the command center is always nice. GuMiHo decides not to play around with that game, but rather just go ahead and grab the high grounds. He does not know what Nightmare is doing. He did not SCV scouts, and Nightmare can be certainly an aggressive Protoss. Last series, I talked a little bit about how my confidence in GuMiHo's PvT is the lowest as far as his matchups. I think he's obviously popped off in TVZ, but they can also look a little, sketchy there, and he has popped off in TVT. He took it to Serral in Yangshiping. He defeated Maro in Yangshiping. It's his TVP where, one, I don't think he has, as amazing of games as far as the entertainment factor. But then, two, I really just don't think he's as amazing in the matchup, which is odd to say, because Terrans have been having such a great time, la-da-da-da-da, but when GuMiHo gets to some of the mid-games, it does feel like he has less, let's say, need to be out on the map than some other Terrans, which can be a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. So, he did get to his GSL finals based off his victory against Protoss, and that's all well and good, but I really think that Nightmare has a strong chance to win out in this best of 5. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I usually am here on this stream anyway. On official broadcast, I'll be lying to my teeth. But seriously, I do kind of cheer for GuMiHo here, but these are both really fun representatives of their races. Nightmare has had a couple of good moments himself. First one being the DT Blink way back in the day, but then recently, not so recently, I guess, actually. But, last year's Atlanta, he actually had quite the run. He was in the knockout bracket, so he didn't get paid attention to as much for the main cast, but he was kicking butt. And I think he is attending the upcoming Atlanta tournament as well. But this is to try and get to IEM Katowice, which he's been in and had a couple of great games, but I think as far as name recognition, we're all looking at GuMiHo to be the victor. Nightmare is really quite a special Protoss. Going for a Dark Shrine Cheese Rush against GuMiHo. And GuMiHo is not yet aware. He has no idea what his opponent is doing. He has not gotten into the main base to even scout the Twilight Council. So that is bad news for someone who's not dealing with the direct line of attack from Blink Stalkers, but rather the sneaky deaky attack from the hidden Dark Templar, and also bad news for someone who's trying to be the aggressor. This is when you zig instead of zag, and you wish you zagged. GuMiHo's wishing that he actually was just playing a defensive game back at home, waiting for this, because then maybe he'd be paying attention to the little shimmer. Nightmare actually letting his units be on attack command can sometimes be a mistake, but in this case it does look to be on purpose. He manages to catch the reinforcing tank, but usually you go ahead and just command move them into the main and natural. Because that's really where you want to go most of the time. You do need to be wary of a push causing some weird base trade scenario, but I would say that still typically favors the Protoss, provided there's no Raven, right? And there is not a Raven in this game. There was in the last one, though, so certainly something that Nightmare had to be wary of. It's becoming increasingly obvious that it's not a Raven build. This DT can literally see the lack of tech lab on the starport. They're still dependent on orbital scans, which GuMiHo did have some available, as very good Terrans do around this time. The most typical DT rush timing on 2 bases, obviously. But that doesn't mean that it's easy peasy. It's the first step into making sure this doesn't get into a catastrophic zone, but that's obviously still a potential for the DTs to do damage, which, have they done enough? That's a fair question. Stalker's really trying to bite off more than they can chew. Missile turret's ready, so the DT not going to find any more damage. They've killed 6 SCVs, a tank, a Cyclone went down, the Reaper went down, refineries went down. That's a weird choice. But it's actually kind of impactful. I don't think GuMiHo's realized. Or he's purposefully prioritizing the mineral income. But you need combat shields, you need medevacs. It's such a weird thing not to have, and Terran players are often the ones scoffing at gas. And it's so rare for the refineries to be killed in the early and mid game that even though we need gas as much as the other races at that point, it can be hard to remember. He has plenty of minerals, man. This is why I'm like, what's going on here? He's gonna pull the boys, but he can't even build a freaking medevac. He's got one. The one lone medevac, and that's apparently good enough. What? He doesn't have a Raven. Who does this? He didn't actually take game-ending damage. I don't know why he's doing this. He thinks he's gonna win? Well, good on Nightmare to predict something like this. A couple of force fields gonna really ruin the timing, although that force field actually missed. There's some logic letting the SCs through to an extent, but was that too much? So many Marines also got through and are taking away all the charge lots. The shield battery overcharge only affected part of that battle. This is already coming up on the offense. What is with the weird PVTs today? Someone earlier on with Mana and Dolan. Orbital command of the natural has to lift, but we got that offensive missile turret, so that's okay, I guess. Nightmare. Warps and Stalkers gets denied that warp in thanks to the pylon going down. Now he's trying to combat the units here, but he needs those charge lots. Here they come on the backside, taking out the power of the tanks. The Stalker micro coming in individually, and Nightmare will have too many units. I am really surprised GuMiHo went for that all in. In the bottom right, now up a game, it is Nightmare. In the top left, we do have GuMiHo. I'm gonna press. I'm gonna go here and then press Alt G. What the fuck is he on about? Oh, it's Windows. I have no idea. Like, Steadfast is messaging me right now about something that is so totally unimportant. Like, what? He's saying that my colors are messed up on my overlay. If you click one of the player's vision and press Alt-G, it will go back to normal. What is wrong with these colors? Can anyone tell me what he's trying to get at? Anyway. Sure. Sometimes people have pointed out that I have my, my preferred color, so that when I press vision, it becomes white, because that's what I like on my, Terran race in particular when I play. But even that's not been mentioned in a very long time, so I don't know. Chat, help me out if you can. Natural Command Center on the way for GuMiHo. 1 Rex expand for him. Nightmare, yet to be determined on his actual plan. Like I was saying, like, last game was really just odd. I I don't know if GuMiHo really had to do that. It is hard to say, because the DT's direct damage is often not what contributes to their victory. It's a lot of their indirect damage. It's how much time it takes for the SCVs to get back to mining, how much time was taken away from your macro because you messed up, because you were busy dealing with the DT, so you missed your combat shield upgrade, you missed your reactor add-on to the starport, you missed that you didn't have any gas geysers, you know? And I'm thinking that's what affected GuMiHo's mentality more than anything else in that game, was that he looked around the catastrophe that happened as far as his base setup and his overall game plan, and was like, no, this isn't worth playing out in a normal way, so I'm just going to pull the SCVs. But it really was not, I felt, like, true desperation. Because like, the SCV pull against someone who has a DT option, when you don't have a Raven, is so, just to me, like, last-second desperation. Even when it's the best thing to do, I would still be like, I don't know! And I was right about that one, but... obviously, GuMiHo had a reason for it. It did not work, and again, you know, special kudos to Nightmare for actually figuring that was a possibility. There's absolutely a chance that he was like, lol, DTs, blah, 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 and then like rolled his face across the keyboard, and didn't have enough defense. Didn't have the shield battery in a position that would help the main attack, which it half did. Half of the battle was under the shield battery overcharge, half of it wasn't. That he wouldn't have the force fields in place to block out the ramp, you know, pretty much the two big things, I guess, there. And so there is that. Highlight the positivity, I suppose. The GuMiHo is going into a tank attack. Was he the one that was loving this in an other qualifier? He might have been. Maybe it was Beyond. Someone was just literally tank attacking every single matchup, especially on Site Delta, which has this natural ramp, which in some ways is extremely beneficial to the defenders. Usually we'd call this the defender's advantage. But in another way, in a tank way, in a siege unit way, it isn't. This is why it can be effective. It's also a very direct, short line between your natural and their natural. So a very popular build here on this map. And GuMiHo is looking to swiftly return the favor in game 2. Even up the score. I don't think it's going to happen. Most importantly, Nightmare is on the front lines, killing the Cyclone, killing the Medivac, and stopping the tank short of sieging anywhere important. This was an excellent handling of the situation. Now, what also helped for Nightmare was that he did grab 3 gateways instead of just 2. So he wasn't 4 gating, which also would have given him a benefit here, but he was 3 gating, which gives you that defensive benefit, while also having the option of getting a little aggressive if that's what you wanted to do. In this case, defensive purposes was beautiful. He does lose a couple of stalkers breaking out here, but it is more than worth it. Nightmare handling the situation, well, like a pro. Because it's one thing to have your gateways ready, and it's another thing to actually be mindful of being out on the map, microing correctly, getting that started before it starts to dig into your natural SimCity problem. Because that's actually usually what I would say kills the Protoss in that scenario, is that they kind of retreat into themselves, thinking, I'll just buy time, and then that's when the tank siege up gets really, really abusive. Oh, okay, Steadfast Immunity was crazy. Great. Good. So that ends the tale of Steadfast. Alright, so 4 Stalker is going to try and get any return damage possible because they have the map control now, whether it's in the Warp Prism or not. So now in the Warp Prism, they can go after these Marines, they can go after these SCVs. Obviously, without it, they would just be stuck kind of waiting for the move out, but regardless, it's a good position for Nightmare to be in. If he doesn't lose the Warp Prism, what the freak? Hey! I was just giving you compliments. Come on, buddy. But seriously, big mistake there. Absolutely no reason for that to happen. I think he just warped in his stalkers that were reinforcing and was paying attention to them. They are having reinforcements. So I don't know what the freak they were doing. What the fuck happened there? I don't know. Oh, maybe the Liberator. Maybe it was the Liberator. These are like the OG ones that took on the tank. Well, now it is the Liberator that's the problem, and Nightmare is, you know, kind of fumbling the ball a little bit. It's like he caught it, but now he's like juggling between his hands. And the tacklers are really close to him, and you're like, ah! Are you gonna screw this up? I don't think he will, but I'm just kind of concerned. Losing the Warp Prism loses all, like, that presence there in the main base. He still has the Stalkers able to track this army, and his Observer also barely lived, but the Warp Prism is always a fear, because it's not just the 4 Stalkers, it's the eventual charge lots, which are a lot more difficult for the Terran to manage. It's also the backstab setup that can be possible with the Warp Prism. That's a little harder to get without it. if you're looking for the Protoss surround in the Terran army. And then he also lost, well, the Stalkers, right? So that's 6 extra units that he shouldn't have had lost. Well, not 6, I guess it's 4. 4 extra. He lost 2 on the defense. But he has Storm. And that's where I think he's totally fine. The supplies look favorable for GuMiHo right now. In fact, the economy looks favorable for him now, too. But that is because Nightmare expedited his technology as opposed to his economy. So Storm is still pretty freaking brutal to be up against. But if it doesn't work, which already that Storm, those 2 Storms are decent, although also splashing the Zealots, I think it's just a matter of numbers. If it didn't work, then GuMiHo's economy would be actually a real problem. But it looks like it is going to work at least enough. More army reinforcements coming in actually means that another storm is going to be necessary, but there it is right there. And at the very end of the day, I mean, at least Nightmare has managed to even up the army supply, and there we go. A little bit more of that snowball finally in effect. A couple more Zealots or Stalkers, actually, even a better decision, in fact, is going to be better. Because this is such a low number scenario that Stalker microability is king. GuMiHo, he was surprised by the storm. I think if he knew it was on his way, then he would have had his reinforcements in the natural up more, kind of threatening the army and looking to micro back and forth and kind of bait out the storms, right? But instead, he was not there. His tanks go down, and he still has to deal with storms without ghosts because they're just now being built. And it does look like Nightmare is going to be able to do enough damage against the Stalkers. Beautiful in his position, actually. Focus fire down these Marauders, ideally anyways. Observer finally gets taken out. GuMiHo's like, freak you. Frack you. You gotta bring that back. Thanks, Battlestar Galactica. But now, it is a little questionable if that was enough. I think it was, but with the EMPs now available, really directly countering the majority of Nightmare's army, there's a chance here for GuMiHo. But a 14 worker lead for the Protoss is obviously a much better position for them than the even work count earlier on. He's already grabbing a 4th Nexus. He realizes that a counterattack could be possible and gets some static defense, which I think is great. And as long as the storms are available so they don't get EMP'd, he can kind of bully the Terran army, make them react, right, to his army positioning. Medevac with the Widowmine drop, not successful. Nightmare handling any form of counter-aggression well so far. He's grabbing +2. As GuMiHo is only now finishing up combat shields, which, by the way, that was canceled, wasn't it, by the Stalkers? Wait, what happened to combat shields, actually? I think I just kind of derped. But the combat shields being so late, for whatever reason that it is, obviously affecting the storm battle that we just saw so much. But now with a more complete army, medevacs, plural, ghosts, plural, and more bio, there's a chance that GuMiHo takes one hell of a fight. He's going to need a big concave. He's going to need the storms to get directly EMP'd. And he's going to need to outlast the Colossus beams. But it is possible. Or he needs a turtle. He needs a turtle. He is in a very difficult position. And he is going to try and move out. I like that. Oh, storm drops coming in. Really not the most devastating, but I like it. As long as it doesn't mean they're missing from the main battle when they're necessary. But they were not necessary. The main battle did not happen, and there was a backup High Templar anyway. Really liking the play that Nightmare's putting down. And I started off this series and the last talking about, like, well, GuMiHo's TVP isn't my favorite from him. I don't know if he's really all that confident in it. I'm not really seeing confidence issues in this series. Or even necessarily like Terran issues. Like, obviously there's mistakes being made, but it really actually feels more like Nightmare's just playing a super solid Protoss. The DT opener might have messed with GuMiHo a little bit more as far as the rest of the best of goes. So GuMiHo is close in the supply to his opponent. His army will be as good as it can be when it's maxed out. Medevacs, Bio, Vikings, Ghosts. But it will be missing an upgrade compared to Nightmare, who could be chronoing his +3. And so it looks doable for GuMiHo if he can also max out, then maxing out kind of the great equalizer But Nightmare is ready to go, and he's not wasting too much time past the point of being maxed out. So he's not going to wait for +3, and actually just lost a Colossus right there. GuMiHo picking up on the one moment that Nightmare looked away, so that's decent for him. But Nightmare has a plan. He's going to go over with a bunch of charges up to the north side. Main attack down the south. Does have an Observer. And Nightmare overall has control over this game. GuMiHo just trying to live, trying to posture when possible. Puff up his feathers when necessary, and then ultimately, yeah, get out to that mat situation. And then Nightmare might be a little too hesitant to push the issue at that point, and GuMiHo might be able to get a 4th base up. You get a 4th base up, maybe you can afford to transition over into Liberators. You go into Liberators before Nightmare really takes advantage of his position, and then, you know, Liberator's pretty good. This is the way. This is the path forward for GuMiHo, because there was no real time to strike, as Nightmare did not open up a weakness. He transitioned over into Colossus at a really good time. He used his High Templars offensively with the Storm drop, but then actually had backup High Templars, which I'm really glad to see. He expanded at an appropriate time, and he simply has had the more powerful position. He's the guy with the big muscles. And so you're like, well, I'm pretty sure I shouldn't go ahead and tackle that guy. But you're also working out, and you're also getting, like, steroids and shit. So you're almost there, too. You're almost to the point that guy's at. And then it's a fair duel, but we're still kind of waiting. And I like this, too, from Nightmare. He's kind of just preempting how GuMiHo is going to play this out, and his own, you know, inability to actually end the game. He knows it's not going to be that easy. So he's not going to try and force the game to end with his mass Gateway Colossus army. High Templar still being microed as well. He is going to add on the Stargates. You know, there's, you know, kind of 2 options for the Protoss. Well, 3, I suppose, but I'll get into it in a second, because the battle is apparently about to happen. Vikings take out the War Prism, and Storms will not be a part of this fight, which is kind of scary, actually. That was one hell of a potential concave being set up there for GuMiHo, and Nightmare was aware of it. He realized that if he was going to get concaved on to that degree, he could be in a lot of trouble without more AoE. So more Storms might be coming in here. And it looks like he will go ahead and continue to use the choke to its fullest advantage, which I really think he has to do. He might have +3 attack, but GuMiHo did manage to finish up +2 attack and an armor as well. Something I wasn't sure was going to happen. High Templar is continuing to be EMP'd or straight up killed. Really nice defense from GuMiHo so far. The thing is, though, is that as I was saying, I don't think that Nightmare was actually so confident that he could win the battle, that he could win the game. So there's 3 options. One option was to go into an attack and then either, you know, maybe make a mistake and die, actually, but maybe do enough damage it's a bit of a wash, which is kind of what he did, but then he realized it wasn't going to go great and he backed away, which was smart. The second option was just to try and, like, do this over and over and over again. Push in, trade, pull back, push in, trade, you know, that type of thing. Which, you know, there's a problem with that, which is that if you do miscalculate, you might just lose all of your army. The Protoss army is actually quite fragile as the game goes on. If it gets concaved upon without disruptors and, you know, storms, I guess, actually, like, the damage out from the Protoss army actually isn't enough compared to how fast it dies to the Marauders. And then the third option, which is what we're now we've gotten to, is to go into disruptors, which obviously are one-shot wonders. So if you do get into a position where you're like, oh shit, I'm about to die, you throw out the disruptors. At the very least, they buy you some time because the Terran has to respect that. So that was, like, usually the 3 options, I guess. And the 4th actually is going into Stargates. So 4 options, yeah. But the 3 options have kind of already been expended. There was maybe an attempt to end the game, realized it wouldn't work. There was an attempt to take some better trades. That didn't work. And now we have some disruptors because I think, frankly, it's necessary, but it's more molding into the supreme late game play of the Protoss, which is going to be AoE, capital ships, and yeah, disruptors primarily for the AoE. We might get there, we might not. GuMiHo going for the counter-offensive, trying to get something done, but disruptors are in play and making him micro this way and that, allowing also the Zealots to get some more surrounds. Finally, they are taken care of. The storm on the backside would have been brilliant, but he did not control that. Didn't control the disruptor as well, because the other side of the scenario is catching his attention. Getting a little awkward here for Nightmare. GuMiHo almost found an ideal scenario, one in which he won both sides of the fight. A lot because he forced 2 sides, and I don't think Nightmare was expecting it. Nightmare did have to kind of go, oh shit over here, oh shit over there, oh shit over here. And he did make some micro mistakes, but GuMiHo at the end of the day doesn't manage to overwhelm his opponent, and now Nightmare is even the one on the offensive. Now that's a lot of bio underneath Medivacs. I'm not sure he can actually continue forward with this for that much longer, but as long as the charges are alive, he's going to go for it. Disruptor kill was so ballsy from GuMiHo, but it worked out. And without the Zealots, without the Disruptors, of course the Stalkers do not stand a chance. Upgrade to finish up for Nightmare, but now he is missing army. Where are the gateways? What is 3,000 minerals going into? What is happening? Nightmare, he built so many Zealots on the backside, now trying to set up a surround and a juicy Storm in the midst of the bio, but that is a High Templar without Storm. That is looking awfully weird. The Medivac numbers are not here. The Medivac is alone and without energy, and that is a very injured bio army. No Widowmines to help out, no EMPs to help out. The Zealots are going to be brilliant for this particular battle. Stalkers also growing in number as Nightmare finally gets the time to warp in enough gateway units while also building the carriers, by the way. And GuMiHo might still have an army supply lead, but he doesn't know about the carriers. He's going to try and continue hammering this home, hoping he can overwhelm his opponent, catch him before a warp-in saves his life. But that's actually not the trick anymore. There are carriers on the field with +1 working on their +2, and GuMiHo has no direct response for that. A mere 19 Marines, with +3 to be fair, but still, no Vikings, not a tremendous amount of Marines, and still the worry of those storms. The EMPs are only just coming out once again. The army of GuMiHo will probably be enough right now to stall out the actual end of the game, but this is where Nightmare has so much time to breathe back at home. He's got his 5 bases set up for a long time. He's getting his 6th. He's rebuilding his robo units. He's got all the gateways pumping once again. He has the bank. He has so many options. And the one thing that he doesn't want to do is allow himself to be surrounded once again. The charge lots do come in, but that is a very good Terran army. 3-3 haven't completed, actually. Well, the Zealots are only on +2 armor, and that is exactly what Nightmare didn't want to do. I think if he holds a offensive position, but is awfully cautious with it, doesn't actually want to take the fight while he builds up his Colossus, builds up his High Templars, and builds up Disruptors, I think that's great. That would have been great. But I think he also underestimated how much GuMiHo still had pumped out bio-wise. So Nightmare overstayed his welcome a little bit, but Shield Battery Overcharge, Defender's Advantage, Colossus finally getting involved too. I don't think GuMiHo is going to get the slap back that he's hoping for, but this is now GuMiHo's time to perhaps breathe a little and maybe get a stronger response to the carriers. You know, a handful of Vikings also would help out against the Colossus, so really not a bad idea if you could get to it. Gas being a problem, Starport production being a problem. Now we have the engagement going under here. 3 Colossus, Laser even down, but so many Medivacs still healing, or are they? They actually have no energy. More are on the way. Marauders also trying to reinforce. A blink forward again from Nightmare as they continue this back and forth engagement. But Nightmare will finally push GuMiHo back once again. Just a mere orbital holding this position. This was a new base. Or was it his third? No, it was a new base, but he gambled with the planetary, or lack thereof, I should say. So far, I guess it's been okay. He has not had to rely on a planetary there to defend, but that might change. Planetary might be helpful now. Vikings are finally on the way, but it's really the gas problem. The Terran not taking all of their gases when they immediately can is usually a decision, right? But then it actually becomes a problem as they forget or don't realize. The jump on top of the Protoss army looks a bit too much for me. I think this is going to be too much damage. GuMiHo, without the Medivac healing, without the Vikings focus firing, without the number of bio necessary, will finally lose game number 2. Considering his position, he really did claw his way back into it and almost had, what, 3 moments to get that one great engagement and immediate counterattack. There was 3 times that almost happened, I believe. But just always a little short of the units. Nightmare always had a little bit much from his earlier advantages in the game. It was a good one. It was a good one. But now GuMiHo is on his last life. This is his last chance to get into the Katowice qualifier, Katowice tournament. And it's not even the last qualifier. If Nightmare does 3-0 here, he still has to face many, many good players in the closed bracket. So there's still a bit of a road ahead. In the bottom right of Oceanborn, up 2, he is Nightmare. In the top left, we do have GuMiHo. Oof, what a game. So, now that all of us can breathe, I do think just the ripples of the early to mid game that so favored Nightmare really ended up saving his butt a couple of times. If he didn't have the economy that he had, and the production setup that he had as far as those gateways coming in, there is 2 moments where I think that GuMiHo does win on the counteroffensive. But Nightmare did have those advantages. I also think that Nightmare was dangerously close to making his own mistake as far as, you know, kind of those late game forgetfulness, the late game mistakes where you forget something. Yeah, GuMiHo might have forgotten to grab his extra gas geysers after initially deciding not to get them. Like, it's a decision and then it's usually a mistake is usually how it goes, even for the pros, because it gets so back and forth. Initially, the decision is, I don't need gas that much. I'm a Terran player. 8 gases is surely going to be enough. Then you don't realize your gases are depleted in the mana natural. You don't realize that you're building like a mostly Ghost Medevac Liberator Viking composition. And then you don't have enough gas. And that did happen for GuMiHo. But for Nightmare, I think the Protoss, not exactly equivalent to that, but also a late game mistake that can be made, getting so caught up in the action that you don't produce enough production facilities. You don't have enough gateways for the amount of mineral bank that you are building. Or you don't have enough robos in case everything goes to shit. I need to rebuild the robo unit specifically. I was worried that was going to be Nightmare's problem. That when he lost that battle in the middle, and all his Colossus died before they could recall out, that he didn't have triple robo, he might have gotten overwhelmed, but he did warp in enough zealots, and GuMiHo also was lacking healing, which seems to be a consistent problem over the last week, actually. I've had so many TVPs where the Terran actually ends up losing because they don't have enough healing. Now, Kelazur kind of skews those results sometimes because he is maybe a bit of an overstimmer, but just like a super aggressive Terran. So it was a lot of Kelazur. But now GuMiHo also having the problem. What we have here for this potential final game, though, is not a macro, passive, let's get into the same scenario as last game and duel each other at the 20-minute mark. Nope. It's going to go into a fast third gateway. Of course, last game certainly wasn't passive. It just actually got to the 20-minute part. I don't think actually 20 minutes, but it got to the super late game. I'm not sure this game will. Nightmare with the triple gateway opener and proxy gates against the Terran, who does not have a bunker. Get a little sketch. GuMiHo did not scout this game either. He didn't get a Reaper, or his Reaper didn't come over until just now. There we go. He did not get an SCV scout, and he is not going to get a scout with his Reaper either. The Reaper also did just die there before it could even try and scout the proxy gate. 2 Adepts is not suspicious. 5 Adepts would be. That is 2 Cyclones, though. He did reactor them out. Or maybe just built one after another. The point is, it's like that's actually a lot of microability. And hold on here. This actually turned around a Nightmare pretty freaking hard. I mean, first of all, he went for an Adept play. And the Adepts were more so wanting to get past any opposition to get into the main natural. Then maybe if they are winning, they could get on top of the Marines. But that was going to have to be a read. And then second of all, they just got surrounded. that is actually the best possible case scenario for GuMiHo there. Nightmare, well, not going to win this one, I feel like. That's pretty bad. Proxy Gateway loses power and a supply block hits him too. 2 Cyclones, the Medevac still able to micro, and the Depth's not finding any wiggle room on GuMiHo's side of the map. I mean, GuMiHo could just go for an attack. You know, one thing's guaranteed, they don't have any technology. They might have an okay number of units even after the depowering of the 3rd gateway, but they're not going to have Resonant Glaives, Blink, or Charge. So if GuMiHo had pushed the attack there, it might have gotten something done. But I will say that if they are getting into charge and they are chronoing it, which is exactly what Nightmare is doing, the time it takes to successfully get across the map on Oceanborn might be too much. You know, you get out of the side of the map, Zealots still don't have charge for their 20 seconds, but then you don't have, like, stim. You can't just blitz through the Protoss army. Then suddenly, if overstage, you're welcome, because charge comes in with, let's say, 6 zealots. Wouldn't be a lot, but it'd be some. That does take away some of the power of the potential push I was talking about. Still expected something more. I still expected the Cyclone to go for the medevac harassment. A little bit more presence just to scare the Protoss, but I guess GuMiHo doesn't know exactly what his opponent is doing. The proxy gate 100% means technology is delayed, but exactly timing that out correctly and then not getting overwhelmed is always dangerous. Once again, Nightmare's going into some Storm. The lickety split. Now, one of the reasons it worked out in the last game was that GuMiHo was distracted. He had a large portion of his bio army that was in the natural domain. So it came in after his first portion of the army had been stormed and after his tanks had been jumped upon by the zealots. If that other half of the army is there to threaten the engagement, so the storms have to decide, like, oh, do I go right or left? Then they can maybe stop the zealots from getting on top of the tank, so the tank's still there to try and focus fire the High Templars that have dropped out of the Warp Prism. It is very different. Also, we have a Raven, which could interference matrix the Warp Prism, so that's another thing to worry about in this particular game. What I'm saying is that GuMiHo actually had a chance to hold on against that storm last game, and then he just not only was completely, totally blindsided by it, but was in some unfortunate army positioning. This is much better. This is like such an ideal scenario. All of the army here together with the tanks sieged up and so much room to spread out. I mean, that's what you want. The early storm was really effective in that last game a lot because it was going to be a swift surprise after a tumultuous early game. You know, it wasn't quite clear exactly how the game was going to go. So I thought it was great, and it did work out great. But the other side of things, when we do see this fast storm, is a Terran who's aware of it, who's confident against it, and who has good micro against it. And then the lack of upgrade, the lack of units, and the lack of economy for the Protoss does turn its ugly head. And suddenly it looks like a terrible idea, and you think, okay, Storm coming out fast is not a good thing. So it can be off, you know, I guess sometimes really, really hit or miss. For Nightmare, he will be very dependent on Storms for a while yet. Charge is done, sure, but no blink, no upgrades. Zealots coming in to try and distract are very successful. 2 probes went down, I think, to auto turret harassment. That's exactly what it was. But the Raven then gets kind of F2'd by the looks of it, so that's a bit unfortunate. Nonetheless, tanks are here, army is spread out, Observer is denied, and Nightmare, being the aggressor should be more of a front. I don't think this army wins unless it gets the most beautiful storms possible, which you don't usually want to gamble on. I think it's a front. I think it's basically like, here, I'm here. Like, I could jump on you. Like, watch out. But it actually isn't going to engage. The Warp Prism picks up the High Templars and then proceeds to go for a Storm Drop before the missile turret is actually done. Ooh, this Storm Drop. Oh, that is pretty Jose. If it lives, that is one heck of a Storm Drop. It will. 10 SCVs go down, so many more injured, but also a handful of arm units, I believe, went down there too. But now Nightmare has the problem that he almost had last game. He was almost caught being too aggressive with the High Templars and the Storm Drop. But then I looked back at his base, he had plenty of time, he had extra storms, he had Colossus on the way, and he was fine. But this time, that might have been a mistake. 7 High Templars in total. These 4 do finally have that storm, but that's still so much Terran that's already concave, that's already on his side of the map, and there's no Colossus on the way. The charge lots are being dealt with far too easily without their upgrades, and Nightmare is in a lot of trouble. This game has not gone well for him from the get-go, really. I thought there was more potential at the very least with the Adepts, but then getting surrounded, nipped it in the bud. GuMiHo just needs to avoid any super devastating storms, which is exactly what he's trying to do, splitting his army. The tanks are being overwhelmed, the storms are chasing after him, and Nightmare is going to hold, at least for now. He is still up against a better Terran economy, and EMPs are on the way. Finally, really starting to dig into some of this army, but there's still enough health on the Marauders to push on through, and now there's nothing to get those final shots on these units. The charge lets come in, but the Archon is sniped, the individual micro can come through, and Nightmare has not done a good enough job to make up for the deficits he still has. The lack of secondary technology, the lack of economy, and the straight-up lack of units at this point. GuMiHo just needs to regroup and repush, and he will not be going down without a fight. He will at least get 1 game in this series. That's the start of a comeback. GuMiHo still at a almost even number of workers, even now ahead, also dropping mules. 4th command center is on the way. He's gonna regroup with EMPs, even a Viking joining in, deal with any potential warp prism drops. High Templar micro, I should say. Colossus number 1 is out, but one Colossus will not have enough DPS, even though it finally has +1 attack, and GuMiHo does not have any armor upgrades. It's going to be EMP'd, along with the rest of the army. The High Templars, I like the attempts. I really do. Nightmare, it can be one of those very frustrating Protosses to face. The DT builds, the hidden High Templars, the good micro. But the like offside High Templars, is what I'm gonna call them. The offside High Templars do not work. And when you bunch up your entire army, EMPs are still pretty freaking effective. Nightmare might be alive, but he is not thriving. The 4th Nexus will finish. That's great, that's cool, that's Gucci, but has no idea about the 3 medevac drop off to the left. His army is positioned defensively around his 4th, but then now he knows not about the right side. As the scan comes through, that's always a bit of a tell. The army moves over to the right. This isn't actually the army. This is more so the army. It's got the medevacs, and it's looking to snipe that 4th Nexus. GuMiHo with a simple little 1-2 trick. Look over here, and his other hand, took away the ball. We'll grab the Nexus. And even if Nightmare had 100% predicted that, he knew this was a strong possibility that the Terran would do this, he actually still didn't really have an answer for it. But I will say, having a couple of High Templars right there would have at least stalled out the snipe. That's the only thing I can think of that he would have been able to do to split his army, even, you know, as well as possible, I guess, in that scenario. Provided that GuMiHo didn't just straight up half his army and then lose both halves in devastating battles, he can always pull back, regroup, and he still has the significant army supply lead. One Juicy Storm starts off this all-in from Nightmare, and I'll call it an all-in, even though a Nexus is being built. If this does not work, it is going to be game. More High Templars getting some pretty juicy storms. The Archon adding in little bits of damage, and the Warp Prism barely surviving is giving Nightmare some hope. A 20 army supply difference. Upgrades are even. High Templars not being immediately countered as we have no ghosts on the field. Did I call this too soon? And GuMiHo obviously realizing, okay, I actually still need to be wary here. 4th base gets lifted as he realizes he cannot defend it and it could be tackled. Now, there actually aren't any stalkers, so the 4th base, funnily enough, would have been fine. But, you know, that's usually a good idea. And GuMiHo does just pull back once again. Provided he has EMPs next time and doesn't take so many storms to the face, his army still is superior in numbers. Superior upgrades, actually. He got an armor as well. So that's the good news for GuMiHo. I still think he has a good chance to win this game, but Nightmare, you know, that push was kind of the ticket. It got good storms. It pushed the Terran army entirely back. It caught some reinforcements as well in that really awkward scenario. And he did grab a 4th Nexus behind it. He believed in his potential to bring back this game and didn't truly all in there. And he's right. He's absolutely right. GuMiHo needs to take this upcoming battle seriously. He can win it. Absolutely, but it's not a guarantee. It's not a 30 supply difference in which you just raffle stomp over your keyboard and you're like, whatever, man, whatever happens. That is not the case. 4th base done for both players at this point. GuMiHo is a planetary on the front lines. Always a good place to be. 3-2 upgrades on the way for the Terran too, while Nightmare is still only working on a single forge, but single forge better than nothing. And Nightmare is really good about dotting his units around the map. Zealot, Observer, Zealots. He's got High Templars, I think, at all the bases, ready to back up any fight that initially goes poorly. Because even amongst the pros, they definitely have the same thing as much more exacerbated in the lower leagues. But they have the, okay, I've EMP'd all the frontline High Templars. Let me just go ahead and stem over and win here. Oh, what? There were backup High Templars. Oh, no. That happens with the pros, too. And Nightmare's been particularly good about always having those backup storms. Always having one more or two more than GuMiHo expects, and always having the one that can try and save his life either by tackling the Terran army or just kind of creating some space. I really got to give it up to Nightmare here. He was almost down and out. And he still has the upgrade problem and the army supply problem, but it's so much more typical for a mid to late game TVP to see these deficits. It's not the game over deficits as a 40 army supply difference. Or a 3-base economy, you know, desperately trying to max out, which is extremely difficult to do. He's got his 4th, he's getting a 5th. GuMiHo, ditto. Finishing up his 3-2 upgrades against Nightmare's only +3. I do want to really emphasize how many Zealots were made in that last game because of the way the game went. And because what had to have happened, and sure, but the armor upgrades were lower than GuMiHo's attack upgrades in the last game, and I think that did affect some of the battles. In this game, there are no armor upgrades for the Protoss. GuMiHo's +3 army with an EMP is going to shred the Zealots. It's going to be comical. Nightmare caught in a somewhat weird scenario, but GuMiHo's split army is not having so much luck. Now it is, maybe getting a little bit more of a surround here. Ghost EMP did not go through, so a lot of storms still available, but the Colossus were really caught in an odd position. There we go, more High Templars getting EMP, but more High Templars are still freaking available. How many does Nightmare have? Maybe enough to actually hold once again, but GuMiHo has one hell of a concave. Vikings free firing on top of the Colossus, and Nightmare with one more storm. There's always one more. Might have enough to hold it again. The charge lot warp bins will save the day as GuMiHo respects that and pulls back with his injured army. I cannot believe how many storms that guy had. What the shit? He's built 21 High Templars. What? You just don't see that often, and sometimes it's because they built Archons instead, but honestly, even sometimes not then. Because there's a point in time in which Protoss players are just like, well, Archons are absolutely going to get blasted by an EMP. They are the thing that bunches up the most. They're part of the main army. They're not sneaky deaky off to the left and right side. So they kind of, just stop building High Templars. But Nightmare is so insistent on basically only using them as High Templars, only merging them when they're already, almost dead, basically. And he's so insistent on having so many backup ones. It's actually really annoying. But I also think this is actually a way that Protoss should be playing. And GuMiHo is having a lot of trouble handling the amount of storms that are being thrown at them. Whether it's just the sheer amounts in a direct engagement like the last one, or just the way that they come in at the last second from a direction he's not expecting, so he kind of has to respect it more. Hot diggity damn. Nightmare playing some fine PvT. Getting 2 more Colossus, I think is a great idea. GuMiHo is on 6 bases at this point, and the 6th of the planetary this time. He's got 3-2 upgrades and is about to finish his armor, so he's going to be fully capped out there. Still no armor on the side of Nightmare. I'm pretty sure the charge lots did get totally destroyed in that fight. It's just like the High Templars were so much more the point. So let's see the Zealots get demolished again. I would love to see some Disruptors. I think that's got to be gotten. I think High Templars are eventually going to find themselves 1 storm short. And that's all it takes. That's all it takes is missing out on the final storm to get the actual kills. And Medivacs heal up the army again. And everything gets overwhelmed, especially without armor upgrades. And I'm really scared about that. I absolutely still am. Disruptors, again, at the very least, even if they don't get the shot, they have to be respected. More than the storm does. Like, you still want to respect storm. But you can theoretically run through a storm if you know that your units will survive because they've been healed up. Because the Protoss army is now down to pure stalkers, as the Colossus are once again found out, under-defended. Nightmare focused entirely on the left side, and well, that is going to be it. Nightmare just 2 all over the place, losing track of the Terran armies, plural, and not being able to take any fight. Like no fight was actually taken there by Nightmare. He just was traversing the map and having his entire army killed. So a bit of a letdown ending, but still, kudos to Nightmare. That was almost an amazing comeback. In the top right of Alcyone, it is Nightmare, still up a game, and 1 away from qualifying into tomorrow's bracket. In the bottom left, we do have GuMiHo, who really had to work to win that last game. I absolutely think he was with me, basically, as far as our perception of the game and kind of how it was supposed to go, and how the Protoss was frankly supposed to just keel over and die. He was mindful that Nightmare wasn't such a pushover, so he had him regroup. But then he did an attack, which I would say is usually 9 times out of 10 totally fine to do. And Nightmare did get enough units to surprise the guy, to surprise GuMiHo, and to surprise me. And that attack, that defense that turned into an attack with the first set of, oh my god, how many storms does this guy have, really allowed Nightmare a way back into the game. But I do think, at the end of it, not only was he missing, obviously, the same amount of map observance that he had before things got really topsy-turvy. He did lose out in the Zealots and the Observer that was tracking the map. I also think that his composition was getting a little too one-dimensional. The fact is that storms often aren't what gets the killing blow. Like, they are the things that do the tremendous amount of damage all over, and they're good. But if the Terran is really good as well, then they're, even when they aren't expecting the storm, they're usually running away from it or simply dodging out of it with the micro if they've got it, so that their Marines barely live. The Marauders almost always live, they're just injured. So I think that's kind of what it comes down to a lot of times when it's so storm-based. It's like, yeah, the storms are looking very good, but at a certain point, you're basically like hinging on this one more is enough, and if you don't have that one more, or you don't have something that supplements it better, then the very, very injured Terran army is still enough to overwhelm you, because when you are down to armorless Zealots, armorless Stalkers, and Colossus that never got a real chance to shine in that game, they were always caught in an awkward position, the Bio army is just barely healthy enough to push on through. And that is also the big difference between like Storms and Disruptors. Storms blanket a larger portion, are almost guaranteed to do some amount of damage, but they don't get the kills a lot of the time. They obviously got a lot of kills, but after 21 High Templars, of course, they should get some kills. Disruptors, if they hit, they guarantee the kill, right? But I do think Nightmare was playing with kind of still a very fragile composition, basically. Like, the Protoss army, when it is majorly Stalker, Colossus, is also very fragile. If it gets surrounded, if it gets concave, if it gets out-upgraded, that particular game, all it takes is one wrong maneuver, one wrong place, wrong time. But I don't think Storms are quite enough to cover it in the same way that Disruptors often are in many, many, many other Terran games. Terran versus Protoss games. But anyway, yeah, it just... I love that Nightmare's doing it, but there might be too much emphasis, is I guess what I'm kind of putting down here. Had he transitioned over to Disruptors, it still wouldn't have saved his life, because at the end of that game, it was just his total lack of awareness of where GuMiHo's army was. He was once again caught rushing over to a side, but this time, the units lost in the movement was tremendous. It was unrecoverable. So... not really a point to overanalyze that, I suppose. But in general, I do think there is a weakness to relying so much on High Templars. Not to mention, the most obvious thing is that if they all do get EMP'd, lol. LMAO. But anyway, second chance here for GuMiHo to tie up the series. He got that first game, he gets another one, maybe he can actually get the comeback going. He is going for a factory expand, if I did see that correctly. Maybe I didn't. I was going to talk about other things. But he's going into a 3-1 setup. We actually saw this from Dolan. GuMiHo is one of those experimental players, more so than others. So seeing him do something that I would attribute more often to a North American Terran, it's not surprising. And it's not like North American Terrans are only the ones who do it. Absolutely. GuMiHo will throw this out every now and again. It's a very slow siege hop forward. Nightmare is going for a 3-gate, which sets him up well defensively. This happened on Site Delta as well, or, well, 3-gate versus a tank push, I should say. Not the exact builds. This time around, GuMiHo is working with a few more units and is not letting any of them get sniped earlier on. He is progressing. He's not going to stop. And Nightmare is starting to pick up on what GuMiHo is putting down. He never got the direct scout into the main base, but now with the continued leapfrogging and now just straight up bullying the Tanks on siege. Nightmare knows exactly what it is, but is it too late? The Immortal's trying to get Chrono'd out. There is one shield battery, but only one pylon powering it. The 3 tanks are sieged up, hitting important structures. That was missing on site Delta. And Nightmare might just be strangled. This might be a very uneventful 4th game as the Immortal pops out into the fire of the stimmed Marine. Cyclone does get traded out for it, but the tank's still alive. Some Marines still available. And the tanks are just so freaking beautiful against the Stalkers. You can try and micro them individually. You can try and flick on top of them, but it's just too few units. Nightmare is still 20 seconds away plus from actually having charge. A simple disengage, just unsiege, actually still gives the tanks a lot of power in these low unit scenarios. Nice micro there on the tank. Almost like a Brood War scenario here, honestly. Dragoons versus tanks, Stalkers versus tanks. GuMiHo will want some more fodder units. These Marines now with combat shields as well. Even just a handful of them contribute greatly. And they're going to help target fire down the Robo. So no more Immortals. The charge lot number is not high enough. It's currently at 0 because the number of gateways has not been high enough after losing the 3rd one. And just losing so many waves of units. At this point in time, Nightmare is kind of on the copium. He is, I don't even think he's actually truly hoping he can still win this game. I think he's just digesting it. Overcharge. Not going to save the Stalkers if a tank is blasting away on them. GuMiHo is totally fine back at home. There's no Zealot run by the killed his SCVs or DTs or anything. This is just Nightmare realizing that he's about to lose his 2-map lead. And is going to be on his last life as well, coming into game 5. GG. Nightmare shook! By the way, I had the alerts muted, so thank you very much, Fear Dragon, for that raid earlier on. We are getting into our game 5 qualifying match to lead into tomorrow's closed qualifier. Who is it going to be? In the top left, it is Nightmare. And in the bottom right, it is GuMiHo. GuMiHo managing to claw his way back. It was a real struggle in game 3, even though he got a lead. Nightmare almost made him throw away that lead. But then game 4, it was smooth sailing. Perhaps Nightmare is shooketh. Has been shooketh. Or perhaps he just did not realize fast enough exactly what GuMiHo was actually doing. If he had realized, let's say immediately, he might have had a more aggressive position with his Stalkers. Now GuMiHo was making sure to tank hop, siege hop, from the middle of the map. That was a very conservative play. So I don't know if the Stalkers could have done anything as far as really halting the push. Like the push was almost accepted that it was going to be slowed down, but it was going with safety first. But I do wonder if maybe he could have made more Stalkers. I wasn't clear on his use of Chronos and mineral production for his 3 gateways. Maybe he could have gotten his Immortal faster, I think is probably the biggest thing I can think of. Because I didn't catch when that started. And he could have had a line of shield batteries a bit faster too. So he could have had the forward one actually finished to use the high ground as much as possible. Then he could have the mid one that was in front of his Nexus. And then he's usually one of the mineral line as well. Because you can expect that to die. It's tricky. Like, the tank holds are tricky. And they can look freaking amazing like last game. Or they can really fall on their face like the Site Delta game. There are 2 different tank builds, but nonetheless kind of a similar idea. And so, very similar idea, in fact. And so when Nightmare just bodied that one, you know, we were like, oh, great. But then when he 100% struggles against the next one, it's like, well, is Protoss okay? I don't know. I don't know if GuMiHo's going to be able to do that one again. Nightmare is going to go for a Twilight Council. Not deterred from that. Still finding it to be the best option. I also don't think he'll be adding any DTs, even though he won a game with that one. Well, actually, you know, the DT game, to be fair, was also potentially a tank push game from GuMiHo. He had his army in the middle of the map, and he could have, if he had not been forced back home, could have continued So in that way, if you were expecting, I guess, another tank-focused push in the early game, maybe a Dark Shrine would be a good idea. It gets a little screwy, especially depending on with the Raven. Yes, no, maybe so. But yeah, you know, the DTs are clearly they're a gamble. They're a cheese. They got to do a significant amount, and no, Nightmare will not be trying to do that again. It is into the blink. Second gateway on the way. And a probe going out to get some scouting, I believe. GuMiHo has a Cyclone clearing out anything that might be hiding in the corners. And, ooh, has gone for a slightly tricky situation. The Banshee coming out against a potential aggressive Stalker player can actually make the game for Terrans and sometimes break it. But it's not the 4-gate from Nightmare. It is just that 3-gate. Not even, sorry. It is still 2 gateways. That is still the 2nd gateway building. So he is going to go into macro mode, not deterred from a good old macro blink build just because of his last loss. Now the issue is just straight up, does he have the detection in place against the Banshees? There's no weird, like, well, he's attacking and the Banshees to be used offensively, but then maybe they take the gamble and they move around. Like, there's not that so much as it is just straight up, does he have the units in position? Now, the War Prism on the way, it feels worse for Nightmare. That means he will be getting aggressive. Despite only having 2 gateways, he still wants to provide some presence on the map, which Stalkers kind of need to do to a certain extent, especially if you don't know what your opponent is doing. You want to make sure that you have knowledge that they are moving out when they move out with whatever they are moving out with. So the Stalkers are almost never just, you know, always placed defensively, 3 here, 3 there. But you still, like, it sucks when it happens. If it's a Widow Mine drop that they mistimed, then you are hopefully paying attention to your mining, and so you just pull your probes. But if it's a Banshee that you weren't aware of, and you're focusing on your micro on the attack, which doesn't have a lot of potential. It's harassment, it's not an attack. And then the 2 Banshees show up, or even one without a shield battery, that could be devastating to the Protoss economy. It is an even weirder situation than I was expecting. It's still something that I favor the Terran for, because 4 Stalkers is not a lot. But GuMiHo also moved out with his army. He's using the Banshees as a distraction, as well as a potential pop-up surprise goodbye 10 probes. Currently, it's only SCVs that are dying, though, and things are getting all types of topsy-turvy. Second Banshee taking out the shield battery as the first one was going after the one in the mineral line. Almost killed it, too. I think it will. Absolutely a choice that GuMiHo can make when he pays attention, but right now, all attention on the front lines. Nightmare's 3rd base just bypassed as GuMiHo is going to go for the throats. He's going to get the kill on the Robo. There's no shield batteries in the natural. The hell, there's no even pylons in the natural anymore. And GuMiHo moving out with the Banshees might win him the game. He did lose SCVs on his side of the map, but the damage so far is more for Nightmare. He comes in with the recall, he comes in with the micro, but on top of all those tanks, on top of all the Marine fire, on top of the Banshees free firing on top of the Stalkers, it's gonna be it. Nightmare is going to fall in Game 5 to GuMiHo's Banshees and tank push to the front. Oh no. Nightmare. He had a 2-0 lead. He was playing some fabulous PvT. And eventually GuMiHo won a bit of a macro game, won an easy tank push in the 4th, and a different type of tank push, but nonetheless some early to mid aggression. Works out well for him to complete the reverse sweep. GuMiHo, with the 3-2, will be advancing to tomorrow's closed qualifier for his last chance to make it into IEM Katowice.